This is Marilyn Monroe's famous performance at President Kennedy's birthday celebration. Marilyn had an affair with the president and with his brother, both Kennedys. 3 months after that performance, the actress would be found dead. John Kennedy would be killed a year later. His brother would be shot 5 years after that. The deaths of all three gave rise to countless mysteries and secrets. What really happened? Who or what killed the most famous actress in the United States at the age of 36, almost at the peak of her career? Spoiler, no one knows the 100% truth, but in this video we'll break down the theories. You'll get the full biography of the legendary actress, from a shy girl from an orphanage to a treasure of American culture. This won't be a boring life story. Yes, we'll talk about high art, society, and history, but we'll also, for example, discuss the actress's nude photographs in detail. Right now, I'll tell you about the public and secret life of a film legend, what she hid and who she really was, an actress, a model, a sex symbol. Okay, I'll be honest. Until now, in my whole life, I'd only seen one movie starring Marilyn Monroe. And yes, while preparing this video, I responsibly watched 5 more. I'm saying this because if you're not a cinephile and you're relatively young, you may not have seen a single movie featuring the legendary blonde. And it doesn't matter. Even without watching her films, everyone knows who Marilyn Monroe is, what she looked like, and what she symbolizes. What's the secret? It would seem that the last movie with her came out 60 years ago. Many people question Marilyn's acting talent and even say that any blonde with curves could have been in her place. But why was it Marilyn Monroe who became one of the most famous symbols of American culture? A bit of history. The starting point can be considered 1953. By that time, Marilyn Monroe was already a fairly well-known actress, but in 1953 she became a real star. That year, films like How to Marry a Millionaire and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes hit the screens. It was from those movies that the whole world learned the line, "Diamonds are a girl's best friend." The films were hugely successful, but the main thing was that they finally shaped that iconic image, a slightly silly and naive, yet incredibly attractive blonde with pronounced curves and enormous sex appeal. And in Russian, sex appeal means sexual attractiveness, an actress's quality that both audiences and producers appreciated. Marilyn Monroe perfectly matched the beauty standards of that era. The 1950s were the first post-war decade in the United States, an economic boom and a baby boom. The role model was a married woman with several children. The ideal figure for women was an hourglass shape, full breasts, full hips, and a narrow waist. Today, everyone tries to lose weight, but in the 1950s, America was the opposite. Women tried to gain weight. Being skinny was not cool at all. Ads and magazines literally shouted, "Stop dieting, men don't need your bones, put on pounds quickly." Of course, it's clear that you can't become a superstar on curves alone. An important part of Marilyn's sex appeal and her charisma in general was unique, her manner of movement and speech. Directors in different films actively used her famous swaying walk, her voice, and her timbre. Marilyn was completely unique. She spoke quietly. Early in her career, this was a big problem. She had to work for a long time with a teacher to learn to speak louder, but in the end, her voice became her calling card and perhaps the most important aspect of her attractiveness. And possibly the biggest part of Marilyn's appeal was her naivete and facial expression combined with that same sexiness. This created a unique effect. It attracted the male part of the audience and at the same time didn't repel the female audience. In 1950s America, the infamous Hays Code was still in effect, essentially state censorship of morality. The code banned swearing, nudity, and sex in films. It was not recommended to show scenes of violence, immoral behavior, very long kisses, especially with a negative character, and this was far from the only restrictions. But as we know, you can forbid showing sex on screen, but that doesn't stop people from wanting to rub up against each other. In scenes with Marilyn, directors supposedly showed nothing forbidden, yet sexual tension was still present on screen. It worked flawlessly on the public. In 1955, the film The 7-Year Itch was released, the one with the legendary scene of the rising dress, and a few years later, theaters showed the film Some Like It Hot. Soviet viewers saw it under the title Only Girls in Jazz. By the early 1960s, Marilyn Monroe was probably the most famous woman in the world. She was adored in America and beyond. Millions of people dreamed of talking to her, touching her, getting her number. However, a couple of years, everything would change. She would be lonely and depressed. Early on a Sunday morning in August 1962, she would be found dead in her own bedroom. At the same time, FBI employees would come to the office of the local telephone company. They would confiscate the records of Marilyn's phone calls. Where those records are is still unknown to this day. Who did she call in the hours before her death, and what happened to the legendary actress? Was it suicide or murder? To figure it out, let's start from the beginning. Marilyn Monroe's drama began even before she was born. The actress's mother, Gladys Monroe, worked with film at one of the Los Angeles movie studios. Charles Gifford was her boss and boyfriend. On June 1, 1926, a girl was born, one whom a couple of decades later, the whole world would know as Marilyn Monroe. For her parents, it was not a joyous event. Charles was only divorced, he wasn't planning to start a family, and when he found out about the pregnancy, he disappeared. By that time, Gladys Monroe had already had 2 failed marriages and 2 children whom she had left with her ex-husband. The newborn girl was named Norma Jean. This would be her name for the first 20 years of her life. In some documents, her mother listed the daughter's surname Baker, the surname of her first husband, and in other documents, Mortensen, the surname of her second husband. The real father's surname never appeared anywhere. At that moment, Gladys was 24 years old. She still wanted to live her own life rather than become a single mother. She had already had a negative experience with her first 2 children, so she decided it would be better if other people raised the girl. For the first 7 years of her life, Norma Jean lived with the Bolender couple, strict religious people who, besides Norma, also raised several other children. For each child, they received payments from the state. Not only did her own mother refuse to raise the girl, her grandmother, Della Monroe, also did. She lived not far from the guardian's home. When Norma Jean was 1 year old, her grandmother broke into the Bolender's house and tried to suffocate her 1-year-old granddaughter with a pillow. One of the guardians managed to stop her and called the police. Della Monroe was sent to a psychiatric hospital where she was diagnosed with manic depressive psychosis. Today, this illness is known as bipolar disorder. A month later, Della Monroe died. Later, when she was already a famous actress, Marilyn Monroe would buy back that piano that stood in the home she shared with her mother and place it in her apartment in New York. After her mother's diagnosis, the girl lived for short periods with several foster families and eventually ended up in an orphanage. In Marilyn's memories, it was the worst place on earth. She couldn't understand the very fact that she was in an orphanage. Norma Jean hated the routine and rules of the children's home. She claimed that she was constantly bullied there. She was a shy child.
It's possible that Marilyn exaggerated and demonized that orphanage. Many of the staff later said it was almost a model institution. Perhaps Norma Jean couldn't bear the very fact that she had been sent there, and that created a negative image in her memory. One of Marilyn Monroe's future husbands, playwright Arthur Miller, recalled that she could enter a room and immediately understand who among the people there had once been in an orphanage. When he asked how she did it, Marilyn replied, "In the eyes of every orphan, there is endless emptiness and loneliness." In 1937, the girl's official guardian became Grace Goddard, a longtime friend of Norma Jean's mother. However, even after that, the girl continued moving from family to family. She lived sometimes with one set of relatives, sometimes with another. According to Marilyn's recollections, it was during that period that she experienced abuse. She never named a specific person or family. Marilyn is often described as the first star to speak openly about having suffered violence. This claim is disputed, but indirect signs seem to confirm it. Until the end of her life, Marilyn suffered from low self-esteem, couldn't stay in relationships for long, had nightmares, feelings of shame, and suicidal thoughts, things that adults often experience after childhood abuse. In the early 1940s, Grace Goddard and her family decided to move to another state, and she didn't want to take Norma with them. She decided to marry the girl off. Grace found a suitable candidate literally in the neighboring house. 21-year-old James Doherty was handsome and worked at an aviation enterprise. At 16, without finishing school, Norma Jean got married for the first time. The newlyweds settled in a small house. In the marriage, Norma Jean felt strange, like a child trying to play the role of a perfect wife. According to both spouses, they were strangers to each other. And yet, in a sense, that first unsuccessful marriage led Norma Jean to the beginning of a Hollywood career. A couple of years after the wedding, James Doherty became a sailor on a merchant ship and left on a long voyage across the Pacific Ocean. 18-year-old Norma Jean moved in with his parents. They got her a job at a factory that produced radio-controlled airplanes. One day, a photographer came there. He was taking pictures of women working in production to boost the morale of American soldiers. He was the first person who realized the camera loved Norma Jean. The girl put together a portfolio and took it to a modeling agency. In 1945, at the age of 19, Norma Jean signed her first contract. At that time, there was still no hint of the legendary sex appeal. At the agency, her type was defined as a girl next door, a simple, friendly girl you could easily meet in the apartment next door. She worked constantly. Her photos appeared on the covers of American and international magazines. After a while, the agency convinced her to dye her hair, and Norma Jean became a blonde. At that time, her husband, James Doherty, was docked in Argentina. A magazine with Norma Jean on the cover ended up in his hands. "Look, that's my wife," he told the sailors. They responded with skeptical smiles. Thanks to her success in modeling, Norma Jean was noticed by a casting agent at 20th Century Fox. After several screen tests, she received a one-year contract with a very modest salary. One of the studio bosses said that Norma Jean didn't sound like a movie star's name. He suggested the name Marilyn. She took her mother's maiden surname. That's how actress Marilyn Monroe was born. In 1946, Marilyn was 20. Her husband, James Doherty, had just returned from a 2-year voyage and expected his wife to go back to household duties. But Norma Jean had changed not only her name, but also her plans for life. She wanted to focus on a career as a film actress. The couple divorced within a year, and the first contract. Marilyn Monroe appeared in several small, episodic roles. Some of those parts looked like this. Have you noticed Marilyn Monroe? That's Marilyn. 2 words and 2 seconds on screen. A year later, the studio decided not to renew the young actress's contract. That was when Marilyn understood how harsh the industry she had entered really was. There was no shortage of young, pretty girls. Now, everything depended only on her. Hard times began for a young actress without a contract. Sometimes she was offered rare photo shoots, but at times that wasn't even enough for food. Alone and without work, Marilyn found herself an unusual kind of entertainment. She would put on the tightest sweater she had and walk down Hollywood Boulevard, collecting admiring looks from passers-by. She needed attention. She needed to be liked, first of all, of course, by men. Even 10 to 20 years ago in Hollywood, there was the practice of getting on screen through the bed. Everyone knows who Harvey Weinstein is, so imagine what Hollywood in the 1940s and 1950s was like, an era of absolute male domination in the industry. For a young, attractive girl trying to break into films, there weren't many ways. At that time, Hollywood parties were held where many influential industry figures gathered. Young, attractive girls were there too. Many of them tried to make connections to get into big cinema. Of course, it wasn't done for free. It often implied sex. Marilyn found herself a patron. It turned out to be an immigrant from Russia, the influential producer Yosef, also known as Iosif, Schenk. At that time, he was around 70. Thanks to Schenk, Marilyn Monroe signed a 6-month contract with Columbia and got a role in the low-budget musical Ladies of the Chorus. Marilyn played a supporting character. The film was released in 1948, did not become a success, and Columbia did not renew her contract. It's funny that in the 1950s, when Marilyn became a star, the studio re-released the film and replaced the posters, this time with a large image and the name Marilyn Monroe. The Columbia contract and Schenk's patronage ended, and Marilyn was once again left without work. She went looking for a new patron. He became Johnny Hyde, vice president of one of the leading talent agencies. He was over 50 and was crazy about Marilyn. She became his lover. Thanks to Hyde's support, Marilyn got roles in The Asphalt Jungle and All About Eve. Both films were successful with audiences and critics. In 1951, both received many Oscar nominations. Marilyn didn't play the main roles, but producers and viewers began to notice her. 20th Century Fox signed a new 7-year contract with Marilyn. Under its terms, at first, she was to receive $500 a week. Of course, that was good money, but nothing compared to the fees of modern Hollywood actors. Thanks to the contract, Marilyn began to get new roles, still not leading ones, but noticeable. Gradually, she gained the status of sex symbol.
A turning point in her career was 1952. That year, the films Clash by Night and Don't Bother to Knock were released, both dramas with thriller elements. These are among the few serious roles in Marilyn Monroe's career. Watch them and you'll see she was a fairly good actress, maybe not a genius, but clearly not the talentless person some claimed she was. At 26, Marilyn was not yet a superstar, but already quite famous. Around the same time, posters began appearing in barbershops, garages, and men's locker rooms across America, showing a nude blonde against a red background. Many recognized the girl as Marilyn Monroe. I can't show those photos in full. We're on YouTube after all. If you're curious, Google will help. Right away, there's nothing there that could shock an internet user in 2021, but the early 1950s were a completely different story. Back then, it was basically pornography, and for a well-known actress, nude photos could mean the end of her career. Playboy didn't exist yet. The bosses at 20th Century Fox were furious. They tried to persuade Marilyn to publicly claim that the photos were not of her. But Monroe did the opposite. She publicly admitted they were her pictures. In an interview, she explained that several years earlier, when she had no work and no money, she posed, including nude. It was a very risky move. The whole country talked about it. The public had never seen nude photos of a famous actress before. Marilyn knew she was already being called a sex symbol, and the nude photos would only increase interest in the rising star. In short, she was smart, and she knew how to use hype long before it became mainstream. The films released in 1953 were incredibly successful. Niagara, How to Marry a Millionaire, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes crushed the box office. That happened not only because of the scandalous photos, but they definitely helped. Marilyn Monroe became a superstar,
and America's main sex symbol. That same year, the first issue of Playboy was published. Marilyn Monroe was on the cover, and inside was that same red background photo shoot. It was well-earned fame for a girl who had always been shy and spoke softly. She had come a long way. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes is a musical with songs and dances. Marilyn Monroe obsessively polished every movement. She worked with a vocal coach and a choreographer. After a full day of shooting, she usually continued rehearsing. That's why the situation with her pay looked outrageously unfair. The film starred both Marilyn Monroe and Jane Russell. Jane received $150,000 for the work. Marilyn was still bound by her 7-year contract with 20th Century Fox, which at that time paid her only $1,500 per week, despite the fact that films with Marilyn brought in huge money. The bosses at 20th Century Fox refused to revise the contract. First, why pay more if you don't have to? Second, Marilyn was difficult to work with. This started even before her star roles. She often arrived late, needed many takes, and an acting coach was always on set with her, watching her performance and giving notes. Most directors, of course, didn't like that. Her major success in light comedies finally cemented her image as a sweet, sexy blonde. The studio followed the principle, "Give me the same thing, only different," and Marilyn kept receiving similar roles. Nobody cared about what the actress herself wanted. Her next project was supposed to be a musical comedy with Frank Sinatra. This time, Marilyn decided to act differently. At that moment, she was having an affair with Joe DiMaggio, the legendary baseball player who had already ended his career. In our country, he's mostly known as Marilyn's second husband, but in early 1950s America, he was perhaps almost as famous as Monroe herself. They got married and flew to Japan, where DiMaggio had business. At that time, Marilyn was supposed to be on the set of the new film with Sinatra. Instead, she flew to the other side of the planet and stubbornly ignored the studio's calls and messages. On that trip, Marilyn Monroe realized the true scale of her popularity. When their plane landed at Tokyo Airport, thousands of Japanese fans were waiting for her. The police barely held back the aggressive crowd. After Japan, Monroe and her husband flew to Korea, where Marilyn was invited to perform for soldiers at an American military base. The concert took place outdoors, and it was very cold. On the footage, you can see soldiers wrapped up in coats and hats. Meanwhile, Marilyn wore an open dress. She explained it by saying that this was how the soldiers wanted to see her. For Marilyn, the attention and admiration of the crowd were vital. Joe DiMaggio hoped that the problems with the studio and their marriage would make Monroe think about ending her career, but for Marilyn, that was impossible. It also became obvious that despite all of DiMaggio's fame, the main star in their marriage was his wife. Arguments and disagreements grew. In the end, the marriage lasted less than a year. Around this period, Monroe began having problems with pills. She struggled with sleep, doctors prescribed medications, but she abused pills and alcohol and could show up on set in a completely broken state. However, for the moment, it didn't strongly interfere with her career. Marilyn managed to persuade the studio to revise her contract. At last, her fees began to match her star status. More importantly, she gained creative freedom. Monroe could choose projects and approve directors, an unthinkable luxury for actors of that era. That very film with Sinatra was never made, but new projects promised far greater success. In 1955, The 7-Year Itch was released, one of the key works in Marilyn Monroe's career. It tells the story of a middle-aged man obsessed with fantasies about his attractive neighbor. The scene with the billowing white dress became legendary. Critics liked the film, and it earned a huge box office. That same year, Marilyn Monroe moved across the country to New York. She joined Lee Strasberg's legendary Actors Studio, where they taught the Stanislavski system. the art of transformation through understanding a character's deep emotional experiences. In New York, she also founded her own company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, to work on future projects. All of this once again proves that despite her on-screen image of a frivolous blonde, in real life she was quite an intelligent person. During this period, Monroe began seeing a psychotherapist. He identified Marilyn's key psychological problems: low self-esteem, a constant need for approval from others, fear of being unwanted, and an inability to sustain long-term relationships. All of that sharply contrasted with the public image of a carefree, attractive blonde that audiences knew. In New York, she began an affair with Arthur Miller, a famous playwright and respected intellectual of his time. A year later, they married, and Monroe returned with her husband to Los Angeles to continue working. Over the next few years, Marilyn's mental health problems became more and more apparent. She made several more or less successful films, but production was complicated by the star's unstable behavior. Her problems with pills and alcohol made themselves known. At times, the actress couldn't even say a simple line on set, and filming had to be stopped. The period from 1956 to 1958 was very difficult in her personal life as well. She became pregnant twice. The first time, it was an ectopic pregnancy and required an emergency operation. A year later, she had a miscarriage.
Despite everything, Marilyn quickly returned to work to begin filming a new movie, one that would become the biggest and last hit of her life, Billy Wilder's famous film, Some Like It Hot, released in the Soviet Union as Only Girls in Jazz. It's a comedy about two unlucky jazz musicians who pretend to be women in order to play in an all-female band. The shoot was not easy. Using her star status, Marilyn demanded that the other actresses in the film have darker hair than hers. Director Billy Wilder said that once Marilyn needed 80 takes just to say one line. The line was, "Where's the bourbon?" Instead, Marilyn kept saying, "Where's the whiskey? Where's the bottle?" Anything but the 3 words required. And yet, despite the arguments and scandals during production, the film was an absolute success at the box office. Many critics still consider it one of the greatest comedies in film history. Marilyn Monroe received a Golden Globe for the role. It was the peak of the legendary actress's career. Just a few years later, she would die in complete loneliness. In 1960 and 1961, the last 2 films starring Marilyn were released: the musical comedy Let's Make Love and the drama The Misfits. Neither film was successful at the box office, and both received mostly negative reviews. People began talking about the end of the Marilyn Monroe era. She was 35. The naive, slightly childish facial expression that audiences had loved was in the past. It became harder and harder to maintain her status as a sex symbol. During the filming of those last 2 movies, she was already heavily abusing pills and alcohol. Marilyn ended up in the hospital prama sa съемочной площадке. Working with her became almost impossible. Around the same time, she divorced Arthur Miller. For a short period, Marilyn managed to pull herself together. She changed her hairstyle and lost weight. Although Monroe understood that it was time to change her image, she simply couldn't stop being that same sexy blonde. Today, celebrities in such a situation get plastic surgery. Early in her career, Marilyn had a small operation on her chin, but otherwise, in the early 1960s, the possibilities of cosmetic surgery were very limited. Doctors could not rejuvenate a person the way they can now. For example, implants were not yet common practice. In June 1962, Marilyn had a famous photo shoot for Vogue. At first, the photographer took several quite revealing shots. Marilyn was very upset with the result. She didn't like how she looked or how her body appeared. In the end, the magazine made a new photo in a completely different image. Despite all the difficulties, in the last years of her life, Monroe could still make a strong impression on people, especially on men.
Besides several marriages, she had affairs with the biggest sex symbols not only of America, but of the world: Frank Sinatra, Marlon Brando, Eve Montan. Against that background, a romance with President John F. Kennedy doesn't look fantasticum. They met at several events in the early 1960s. Kennedy had a reputation as a playboy, and rumors about his many affairs constantly circulated in elite circles. Among modern biographers of Marilyn Monroe, there is almost no doubt that in 1961 to 1962, she had an affair, first with John Kennedy, and then with his brother Bobby. Many people who knew Monroe and the Kennedys at the time confirmed the information. The strongest argument against this version is the lack of documentary proof, for example, photographs. But the early 1960s were a different time. Not everyone had a phone with a camera in their hands, and photojournalists were not eager to chase scandalous pictures of a president and a mistress. Unwritten ethical rules in journalism were also different. No respected magazine would publish such photos. For serious outlets, reporting on the adultery of national leaders was considered improper. The famous photo of an embracing couple, where the woman resembles Marilyn and the man resembles one of the Kennedys, is a fake. The only confirmed photo that shows both Kennedy brothers and Marilyn is this one. It was taken at a party after a concert that went into history because of one number.
It was a major event dedicated to John Kennedy's birthday. Marilyn Monroe interrupted filming in Los Angeles to fly to New York for a single performance. It was after that appearance that many people became convinced she was having an affair with the president, although in reality, their relationship was already coming to an end. After that evening, the Kennedy brothers began to distance themselves from Marilyn. Rumor has it that the president's wife, Jackie Kennedy, insisted on it. A huge blow for Marilyn Monroe was being fired from the film Something's Got to Give. It was from those shoots that she flew to New York for the Kennedy party. Marilyn constantly disrupted the production and was often unable to come to the set. Because of this, filming had to be postponed. The firing happened almost immediately after Marilyn turned 36. In her last years, she often pronounced her age as separate digits, 35, 36, as if she was afraid to say the full number out loud. On August 5, 1962, 3 months after her birthday, Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her own bedroom. That night, the housekeeper raised the alarm first. Around midnight, she left the guest house and noticed a light on in Marilyn's bedroom. She knocked and, hearing no answer, called the actress's psychotherapist. When he arrived, he broke a window and discovered Marilyn dead with a telephone trunk clenched in her hand. The sudden death of the superstar shocked the whole country. Most Americans had no idea about all the dramas in Marilyn's life. Her death raised many questions and mysteries. The special services seized the records of Marilyn's phone calls that night. Who she called remains unknown to this day. The psychotherapist first claimed that he arrived shortly after midnight, but the police were called only around 4 in the morning. What happened during those several hours in Marilyn Monroe's bedroom? Who else was in the actress's house that night? Officially, Robert Kennedy spent all of August 4 in San Francisco. However, there were several witnesses who claimed they saw the president's brother in Los Angeles that day. If so, why did he lie about his location? A hypothesis appeared that the special services and the Kennedy brothers were behind Marilyn's death. Because of this, in the 1980s, they even reopened the investigation to the actress's death, but no evidence of violent death was found. Both Kennedy brothers were killed within a few years after Monroe's death, which only added mysticy, but in reality, the events were not connected. Most biographers of the actress also do not tend to view what happened that night as murder. If you look carefully at Marilyn Monroe's entire biography, the suicide version becomes the most likely. There were many people with mental illnesses in her family. She herself was a shy, lonely girl abandoned by her parents. All her life, Marilyn tried to find approval and attention from others.
She never managed to build a family or have children. By her mid-30s, she understood she was losing the appearance that brought her popularity. The world was changing rapidly. The 1960s had arrived, and the new time demanded new heroes and symbols. Yet almost 60 years later, we can say with confidence that the legendary blonde was something more than just a famous actress. There have been many stars in the history of cinema, but only one, Marilyn Monroe.